Good morning, everyone. I am Dong Yop Kim, Mind Education Specialist from the International Mind Education Institute. Today, I would like to learn with you about the wisdom of listening for sharing hearts. Everyone, what is listening? Although listening seems to be so simple, but there is actually nothing more difficult. The definition of listening is not just listening to learn knowledge or information, but a way of communication to understand and accept other people's hearts and connect and flow with their hearts. So if you enter into that phase of listening by opening your heart and being willing to accept, although you don't try, you can hear what others have to say. As you are connected to that person, even if you don't put in any effort or pretend to listen, you will automatically have the attitude to gain that person's heart. Although you cannot do it right now, if you at least know how powerful the attitude of listening can be, I believe it will really help you succeed in the future. There are many books and lectures on how to listen and how to converse in this world. Everyone, you heard about this at least once or twice, right? Yes, that is how important listening is and how intimately connected it is with our success. However, listening is also just as difficult, and the very fact of us trying to learn some listening technique or pretending to listen, it's completely contradictory. If we can truly open our hearts and listen, we do not need to purposely follow some kind of technique or have a special posture for listening. I don't need to try something. However, as listening is so difficult, it cannot be done just because you simply try. But by listening to such mind lectures, it is important to know the true attitude for listening and when it is formed in your heart. Everyone, there was a drug addict called Julio in USA. He always wanted an easy life and lived doing whatever he felt like. Finally, he became a drug addict who hurt and disturbed others. He always caused problems and lived as a troublemaker. Julia was once caught doing drugs and taken to a drug rehabilitation center where he received the mandatory training that all drug addicts who were caught received. However, even after going through all that, when he came out of the rehab, he was again hooked onto drugs and repeated the same life, becoming even worse than before. Once, because he was so hungry, he started to search a large garbage can in a park for some food. Strangely, there were some almost untouched sandwich packs just thrown away in the garbage can. He was so hungry and he tore open those packs. He finished one whole sandwich in just a matter of minutes, in a second, and was about to eat the second one when he realized that the sandwiches are completely stale and rotten. That's when this Julio came to realize that these sandwiches were spoiled and old. Although it smelled so bad, Julio just ate the whole rotten sandwich because he was so hungry. Then later, he started to think so deeply. Why did I live like this until now? I always thought that I'm smart and great, but all those friends of mine whom I used to despise have their own cars. Then on the way home, they can just stop at any bakery and eat some freshly baked bread. They can even take it home to their families. But why am I alone and forsaken, stealing food from a garbage can in the park? And now I worry about whether I have to go to the hospital or not because I ate some dirty food. So, holding on to that rotten piece of bread, he fell deep into his thoughts. From then on, Julio, he tried to listen from other people, but he just didn't have the composure or the attitude of how to listen. So, as he was addicted to drugs, he had no strength to come out of it, and he was caught doing drugs again and taken to the drug rehab center. There was, however, one small change in Julio's heart. Although he was still a drug addict and he could not do anything by himself, Julio's heart to believe that I am so smart and great, that broke down. So Julio was coached by the same teacher in the same rehab center as before. But this time, he did not try. But even then, he was able to listen with his heart. And he heard about how we get addicted to drugs and how, although it is impossible to do alone, we can be free from drugs by receiving help from others. So listening to that, as Julio, he started to listen from his very heart and started to change and became free from drugs. Of course, there were still times when he was tempted to do drugs, but he changed so much right now, and now he has his own family and he lives really happily. And this Julio, instead of living a wasteful and meaningless life only for himself, Julio now lives a valuable life, doing a lot of social work, sharing his story of change, and experiencing and living for the sake of others. Everyone like this, not knowing one's weakness from the beginning and not listening to anyone else from the beginning, they fail as they cannot pour their whole hearts into their lives. Inside that failure, they are isolated within themselves and are unable to easily make relationships with other people. So most people try to learn or try to converse with others by themselves in the beginning. However, there are many cases when, because of their own wisdom and experiences or even small successes, they can no longer listen to the hearts of other people, and they are stuck in arrogance because of believing in themselves. As you all know, Napoleon was a strategist and he had a genius for combat. He won so many victories in so many different wars. And there is a famous quote of Napoleon. He says, "There is no impossible in my dictionary." Now Napoleon, he came to believe that he was the best strategist because of his string of victories and successes, no matter what he did. Once, when they were preparing to invade Russia, many of his commanders were against the invasion. So his closest associates, they suggested that he change his strategy as summer had already passed. And in the winter, it would be a long drawn out war as Russia's roads are so long and deep inside. So they advised him to wait a year and start the invasion in the spring before the summer so that they can fight till the autumn and finish the war. And even though he was advised a lot, but Napoleon did not listen to anyone. In my dictionary, there is no impossible. With that just one belief, he despised what everyone else said. And finally that year, in 24th of June 1812, at the end of summer, they started the Russian invasion. even in the midst of such strong opposition, he only insisted on his own plan and attacked Russia. But out of the 6 lakh people who went to fight, a shocking number of 5,60,000 died, and only 40,000 returned alive in a crushing defeat. So, in this way, the Napoleonic army that seemed on the brink of conquering the whole world lost its strength in a short time. And Napoleon, who failed in his Russian invasion, was dethroned from the position of emperor, and the empire dissolved into chaos. So, even after failing like that, Napoleon still could not realize how arrogant he was, and still believed himself to be worthy of the position of emperor and the best strategist. Napoleon, so he made a comeback to the war and led the French army to war against the British-led army, the Allied army. So eventually he suffered defeat in this war, and later his life came to a miserable end. Napoleon was a great man and a great general who won so many victories. But when he fell into his arrogance, he made a fatal error of not listening, which led to his tragic downfall. Even after all these experiences, the shocking thing is that Napoleon said he has no regrets in his life. Although he fought 60 battles, he also said there was nothing that he learned from those wars, and that there was never any problem in his strategy. So even when he failed for the second time, rather than recognizing his lacking, so Napoleon, he blamed the loss on the mistakes of his subordinates and on their lackings. So he blamed everything on them. Everyone, although we might not have such great achievements like Napoleon, all of us believe that we are right in what we know. That is why within their own knowledge, they accept what people like and what people want. They think that they are listening, but many times they cannot accept another person's heart or opinion. So being able to listen exactly as it was said is not simply about just data or skills. When the heart is delivered, that is when there is true happiness, right? I hope you become those who learn this kind of wise listening and gain such hearts. So if you use this lecture as an opportunity to begin listening, I really hope you can do that. And if you want to listen, you should also know why you are unable to listen right now. So I'll generally divide 2 different kinds of the reasons that people are unable to listen and explain this to you. So one is an external reason. We live in a globalized era, and it was also known as the age of information. There is an overload of data, and if anyone just takes out their phones and searches on Google, it's so easy to get enough information on almost anything. So as there is so much information, it has become much more difficult to distinguish what is genuine and also what is actually beneficial to us. That is why it has become so much more difficult to just listen to what another person is saying, and even more difficult to grasp the opinion that they are trying to express. So in other words, in this materialistic age, people have a lot of hidden meaning behind what they say and what they do. So we who live in the midst of all this distrust, we lose our innocent and pure attitudes, making us more and more difficult to listen to other people. So many times, because there's a lot of knowledge, we think that, I know this already. But mostly, we don't know the truth. We just believe in an illusion that we know, although we don't actually know. So such external information and a society filled with distrust are the external factors for the inability to listen. So when we have experiences of being hurt or betrayed by those whom we innocently opened our hearts and listened to, it becomes even more difficult to open our hearts to anyone else. However, your inability to listen doesn't stem from these outward reasons. They're just obstacles in the way of being able to listen. We can also see that there are some internal factors that don't allow us to listen. So there are people like Napoleon who become arrogant because of their achievements and they don't listen, like I said before. But just because they succeed, it doesn't mean everyone is just like Napoleon. Nobody listens. So it is true that the external factors influence the formation of our hearts and make our thoughts into fixed concepts. However, it is not the external factors that make us unable to listen. If we know our lacking or our limitations, clearly, only then can we have the heart to learn from another person and we can listen truly to what they are saying. And we can have an attitude of being able to receive help from others. Another thing is that when we listen only with knowledge, then that is something. I don't need to really open my heart or trust another person to hear. It is easily possible to gain the same knowledge through what I see or through reading some documents or books. However, listening cannot happen without the relationship of the heart. So in the cases where they don't realize how important and necessary mind education is, there are higher chances of them becoming more self-centered and contrary. So with a blind confidence that if I just try then I can do it, they are living in ignorance, being unable to change their internal factors and learn. Everyone, the Jews, they have a special method of education. These Jews, through conversing, they not only gain knowledge, but realizing their lacking and weaknesses, they learn to have an attitude of interacting with other people and communicating with those others and consider this more important. So they have a method of education that traditionally follows these guidelines. Like this, as you converse one-on-one, you need to acknowledge that what you think you know is not what you really know, and what I insist is right might actually be right. So now, so that is not just insisting on my own opinion, but being able to accept another person's opinion. That is what we call the Havruta. Now Havruta, it's not just that we try to find out the answer by merely opening a book, but it is about coming to know whether the information that I have is wrong or right. And through that, I can realize my limits, whether I know exactly or not. Men are not robots. There is a big difference between man and computers. Computers can only have the information that we feed it, so it searches for an answer within that data. So when we ask a question to the computer, it is impossible to recognize whether it knows the right answer or not. Only when the computer searches through all the data that it has will it come to know that it does not have the right information. So although humans cannot save as much data, but they can admit that I do not know everything. So through that recognition, man comes to realize their weakness and lacking, and it becomes a chance to live a greater life. The greatness of man is recognizing their own weakness. When a person discovers their weakness, that discovery becomes the beginning of learning. Everyone, this kind of a method of education is not just applied in a certain field. However, it is important in different walks of life, and there are many examples of how listening led to both success and failure. Everyone in USA, there was a man called Joseph Samuel Gerard, and he was named the king of car sales. He was a very normal person. So he was not just ordinary, but he failed even more than other people, and it seemed like he wasn't going to make it in life. So until he became 35 years of age, he changed his job 40 different times, and he failed in his business. So he only experienced failure. But then this Gerard, as a last project, there was a real estate business which he tried to start, and that also he failed in. So he had very few choices, and he began his career as a car salesman by learning how to sell cars. And with a very desperate heart, he started this job. So there was really no other way anymore. So he went and then he tried to sell a car. And he was learning a lot about cars, how to sell a car, how to speak to the customers while selling the car. And that's how he started trying to sell these cars. So he tried really hard, but he couldn't sell any cars. Then one day, Gerard, he started to think, and he became curious, why am I only failing in my life? And he could not see himself. So he kept facing failure, and one day he asked his customer a question with courage. Why do you buy cars from other people but you never buy cars from me? So he asked the customer that question, and the customer said one thing to Gerard. He said, you never listened to a word that I said. Gerard was only trying hard to sell. So he was never interested about the customer's wants and what difficulties this customer has. He was not interested in the heart of that person. And that is why Gerard, he only talked about the car, but he never had the wisdom to gain that person's heart. But after losing hearts and having failed in his business in selling cars, listening to that one remark, Gerard realized his mistakes. So then he comes to know from then on that it is not me who try to work hard and listen, but he was a selfish person who never listened to anyone else. He came to know that. So from then on, Gerard didn't try hard to sell his cars, but he started to open his heart and talk to people. He started to find out what kind of music this person likes. Does he smoke? What kind of a car is he interested in? So what will be the difficulties that this person faces in his life? And as he spoke, when he spoke about the heart with different people, he was able to win their hearts over. And even more amazingly, when he gained the heart and trust of a single client, he was able to find 250 acquaintances, colleagues, friends, and relatives around that one person. So like this, when he really cared about one person and gained that person's heart, he was able to get so many people through him. And like that, for 15 years, he sold almost 13,000 cars. Everyone, it's so difficult for us to smell even one small product. And so selling is not so easy. And especially some cars that are so big and expensive. He sold 13,000 cars. And that is a big record, which is even recorded in the Guinness World Records. So that's why this Gerard became known as the king of car sales. But this guy was not brilliant or great from the very beginning, but a failure for around 40 times. Failing again and again, changing jobs countless times. He failed, but he was absolutely nothing. But when he realized the importance of listening and started to hear from others, it brought amazing changes and amazing lives that led to success. So everyone, that is how he was able to create new works. And he was very talented. Everyone, now I'm all sure that you're all familiar with Steve Jobs, who runs the Apple company. In 1967, but one day in 1985, all of a sudden, in the very company that he founded, he was fired. So when he was forced to leave the company, it was so shocking for Steve Jobs, and he was so devastated. So with his skills, his sweat and time, it was a company that was made through such things. But when the company was built and when the management began, there were so many collisions with the managers. So Steve Jobs, who always believed that he was so great, because he was despised by the management, he continued to act rudely and arrogantly, and finally he was fired. However, it gave him the opportunity to change his attitude and to see himself much more clearly. So Steve Jobs started his life again from small jobs, and he went back to being the CEO. And one day in 1997, after receiving a call from Apple, so when Steve Jobs returned to the CEO's post, the first thing he said was, "Don't call me CEO, call me the CLO." So what is CLO? It's Chief Listening Officer. So thereafter, it was not the managers who were making their own arguments anymore, but the executives were willing to accept the ideas of many people in the company and even change according to the expert advice of people from outside the company. So they had that kind of a willpower to be able to change continually. So in this way, Apple, it started with normal innovative technologies, but it changed so much. It continued to accept and change, and many wise people in the world, they have succeeded with good technology. So people who have a lot of skills and good companies, those companies just have good skills doesn't mean that they're all successful. Although there were many computer companies, but the human resources and the technologies that they had were great. But not many of those computer companies have made such innovations and successes. The way that we accept and realize the limitations and deficiencies that I have. So it's not just important for you alone, but it is also important for paving the change in the individual and company or organization. Everyone, Steve Jobs learned to communicate with his company, and he realized the importance of listening. He learned management newly, and he started to communicate together, and he has seen a lot of innovation going on at Apple. Everyone, this is not just something that is limited to one company. So right now, the company called Samsung, which is running as a rival to Apple, and which is also a very global famous company, started with a very small, humble beginning. It was just a small-time electronics company that nobody knew in Korea. Then Samsung suddenly rose to the global stage and became a major player. He became a major player selling not only mobile phones, but also so many electronic products. So behind the scenes was the chairman of the Samsung company called Lee Kun-hee. So Lee Kun-hee, who succeeded from his father Lee Byung-chul as the chairman, was the first chairman and has become a hot topic of conversation when he took over as a CEO. Why is that? Because his older brother, he was not given the inheritance, but Lee Kun-hee, who did not study management, was given this position. And Lee Byung-chul, what he told his son was, you should make Samsung the best company in the world. So this last will, which was a legacy left by the father to his son Lee Kun-hee, it was not just an advice, but it was also for others. Listen closely. So the father, who realized the power of listening, when he passed away by delivering to his son how important it is to listen. So having received this purpose, Lee Kun-hee had to learn, and he had to learn how to listen and change the company. So by the time he started to do this, Samsung began growing to become one of the best companies in the world. Now Lee Kun-hee, in order to make Samsung into the best company in the world, he went to an exhibition that was in another country, in the United States and in Germany, and he wanted to know how well Samsung was selling. But he was so surprised, because even though it was a Samsung shop, the engineers and CEOs at Samsung felt proud about the products that they were making. But in the international market, it was still not of a level to compete with other world famous brands. So before Lee Kun-hee became the world's best, when we really open our hearts and when we change and when we learn, then we can change. But otherwise, this company called Samsung, it will become nothing at all. So then Lee Kun-hee, in Frankfurt in Germany, so he called all of the directors and the branch managers of Samsung, and he made a declaration. And that is something that is so famous. It's called the Frankfurt Declaration. What he said was this: change everything except your wife and children. That was his declaration. So that wasn't just words, but that was Lee Kun-hee's own experience. And that's how he began to listen in Samsung. And so many of the specialists who were there in Samsung, they did not just listen to lectures from people who were related to their fields, but they listened to so many lectures from people who were in different fields. And they continue to invest a lot of money in listening to such mind education. And Lee Kun-hee himself, he listened to such lectures and he started to teach and give such lectures. And they kept changing, and now it starts to stand as a leading company. He comes to realize the importance of management. And even until the year 2000, that Samsung was just a second-class company, now stands as a leading company and has taken over much of the market around the world. In the same way, Samsung's growth was not made simply because of effort, but through the mind of a CEO, Lee Kun-hee. So the culture of Samsung, the work culture of Samsung, continued to grow and change. So we can say that this is one of the results. Everyone, what we say is based on knowledge, and it depends on how well we express it and communicate what we have. So the more we take and learn, the more confidently we'll be able to speak. But listening is not something that we have. listening not only gives us knowledge but also gives us the depth and posture and humility needed for listening. So only if we have a lot of things can we be good at it. But if anyone can really study, then that listening attitude of the mind, that is more important than studying just because someone forced me to, or studying because I have to do it. But this true change is something that happens when I start to learn. Otherwise, I can only stop at learning knowledge. It can never change my life and make me happy and transform my life. Our approach to education is focused on speaking and learning just for a short time in order to be able to do something. And more than listening, we are used to talking. So from this kind of an educational method, if we realize the limitations and we have the power to listen and we can create a connection, then that will be true listening. And that's why you will gain the hearts of so many people and come to know that I might also be wrong. So, we can do much bigger works by listening to others. So like this, about the attitudes of listening, why we are unable to listen, what is the importance of listening, and the attitudes and lives of people. So in your hearts, what kind of an attitude of mind do you have? Depending on that, you can naturally listen to other people. You will learn that attitude. Thank you.